Welcome to the Strategy Skills Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Safarova, and this episode is sponsored by strategytraining.com. And today we have with us Bob Chapman, who is the CEO of Barry-Wehmiller, a $3.6 billion capital equipment firm that he transformed from basically when he took over, it was $20 million business. So that is an incredible story in itself. And today the organization is a combination of 140 acquisitions, actually more than 140, and 12,000 teammates in 28 countries. Bob, welcome.
It's good to be here and to share our message of leadership.
First of all, what you have accomplished and the way you accomplished it, caring so much about your employees, is really inspiring. I would love to start with you sharing with us a concise version of that journey that took you to this day today when we're speaking.
Well, as you mentioned, I stepped into the company in 1969 when it was a pretty broken 80-year-old business with old technology serving the brewing industry. I joined the company from Pricewaterhouse, and from my education, which most of your audience will have, my business education, I have an undergraduate in accounting and an MBA from Michigan, and then I joined Pricewaterhouse. So pretty much a traditional, financially oriented background. And so when I joined Barry-Wehmiller, a broken company, I tried to bring the skill sets that I learned in my education to reshape the business. And one of the things I would say to you is that it's very important as a leader to have a vision of where you're going, okay? And at one stage in this journey, in a transformational stage, I said, not a coach didn't give me this, not a mentor. I just had a moment where I said, I'm proud of our 80-plus year history of making equipment for the brewing industry, but our history does not give us the future that we deserve. And so I made a decision, that turning point from trying to take the business I inherited and making it better to realizing that the business didn't have the fundamentals to succeed in the long term, given the competitive nature and the industry, et cetera. And so we began doing, I call them adoptions, some people call them acquisitions, to try to get into industries with a better future. That vision, a key thing that I would say to everybody, one of the key attributes in the design of my business was balance. Okay, and a word I don't hear very often, but I learned it from studying Chuck Knight of Emerson Electric. I made sure that when I started developing this business with my vision, that we weren't concentrated with any one customer, any one industry, or any one technology. So should something change, we would hurt our people and our stakeholders. So a key thing I learned in this journey is you got to kind of know where you're going, not just react to day to day. And our goal was to build a balanced business with different types of revenue, recurring revenue, daily revenue, and then more lumpy capital goods revenue. And that the business model design as a leader of a company is the most important thing we do. I hear very few people say that. They talk about their strategy, but we designed a business model from our experiences that would capture our skills and build something that would give people a good future. And it was around balance. And, we were started at 20 million. We're touching 4 billion right now. And we're almost up to 150 adoptions. We don't buy companies to sell them. We buy them to adopt them, to keep them. So anyway, the biggest thing I learned, and the other thing I would say to your audience, which I think is very significant, from my greatest challenges came my greatest growth. Okay? I could spend an hour sharing with you some incredibly challenging moments in this journey. It was not a straight line up, for sure. It was a roller coaster. But the way I embraced the challenges shaped the learning that shaped our future. So again, what I learned in the challenges was foundational to us evolving continually to be better stewards of all of our stakeholders. And, again, to your audience, company, we have a share price, even though we're privately held, 70% by my family. We have a share price that simulates a public company. So this will be important. Our share price has gone up over 12% a year, compounded for 25 years. We've outperformed Berkshire Hathaway in that same period of time in terms of percentage growth. And it is, again, it's not because we're in great markets. It's because we designed a business model from our experiences that gave us a future for our people. And we had that vision always, and it gave us a guidance. Okay, and our culture, that we're actually known more for our culture than our product today. But our culture is kind of the premium fuel that goes into that engine that allows us to perform as we have. So again, the future of our company looks exceptional. And it was tested in 08, 09 when people like General Electric and other major corporations crashed. Our share price went up 11% that year, and we let nobody go. So our business model was tested in the worst economic environment any of us have seen in our lifetime, and during COVID, and during the tariff, because our business model is robust, and it gives our people a sense of safety and a sense of a future. So it's been quite a journey, massively exceeded my wild expectation. And I want to add one other thing. If we did an intelligence test today, I would come out very average. Okay, I was never a great student. But what I was blessed with was common sense, creativity, and a positive attitude. If you blend those three together, it explains how I was able to see things other people couldn't see, who had much more intellectual capability, but it almost blinded them to kind of the simple things that I could see. So that's kind of our story, where we got today. And we're trying to be an example for everybody of the way the world could be if companies genuinely cared about the people they had the privilege of leading.
Bob, can you tell us about the first acquisition? So the first company you decided to acquire when you realized we need to diversify and we need to serve different customers in different industries using different technology.
I'm glad you asked that, because my oldest son asked me the other day the same question. He said, of your 150 adoptions, what was the most significant one? And I thought a minute, and it was our first one in 1984, in the fall of 84. We had just been refinanced by an asset-based lender, so we barely survived bankruptcy. We got this very difficult financing. And again, I walked up to my team, locked in, signed all the agreements, asset-based lending. And I said, guys, we need to start doing acquisitions. And my team looked at me, my finance team looked at me and said, Bob, I agree. We have one problem. I said, what's that? And they said, we have no money, Bob. Repeat after me. We have no money. And again, given the personality I just described to you, I looked at them and I said, I didn't tell you I needed money. I told you we need to do acquisitions. And I walked out of that room unencumbered by the fact that we had no money. And I began doing acquisitions. And the first one was a company that I had looked at, just quickly some years ago, that made electronic inspection equipment for the glass industry. After you blow glass, you have to inspect it to make sure there are no defects as you ship it to Coca-Cola or whoever. And I approached this company. It was like $3.5 million company that was breaking even, owned by a South African firm, but it was based in Denver. And I was going to buy it. I just escaped bankruptcy. I was intense not to make a mistake. And my goal was, I brought traditional thinking for my first year. Well, I'm going to cut costs by moving it from Denver to Florida and combine it with our small electronics company and get cost savings. That was my thought process. We acquire, a tiny point. I went to meet with the senior executive in charge of sales. And I said, tell me about your market. And he said, well, in America, we don't really have much competition. The glass companies pretty much buy our equipment. And so we don't really have much competition. And I said, well, what's your sell price? And he said, 55,000. I said, great. And what's your cost? And he said, about 22,000. I said, ooh, that sounds great. 50% margin. Sounded really good to me from where I came from. And then I said, well, what about internationally? And he said, oh, that's a different story about. Internationally, we have a lot more competition because the glass companies in Europe build their own inspection equipment. So we've got to compete with their own internal technology. I said, okay, what's your sell price in Europe? And they said 63,000. And now, again, my first deal, I had no script. This was just a conversation. But I had a moment, honestly, of brilliance. I said to this gentleman, I said, oh, I must have misunderstood something. You said where you have no competition, you're selling it for 55,000. Where you have intense competition, you're selling it for 63,000. And this older gentleman looked at me kind of like I was naive. And he said, Bob, it costs more money to do business in Europe. I said, oh, you're right. But could you just do me one favor? Could you raise the domestic price to the international price so we have one price? He said, sure. Again, the company was breaking even, $3.5 million in sales, selling 30 units a year. And then he said, and this is another moment, he said, look, we're just about to get a major order from this glass company, and it's good news. And I said, ooh, a major order right now might screw up the deal. So could I go talk to the customer? And he said, oh, sure. So I fly to meet with the president of this glass company. And I said, I understand you're about to place an order. Could you just slow it down a little bit until we close so we don't screw up the deal? And he looked at me and he said, Bob, I'd like to help you, but we got a 6-month payback because that machine's going to replace people and I won't make my budget if I don't buy it. So to your audience, I took those 2 points. They were breaking even as a company, but saw 50% margin as great, but tried to get more money in Europe because it costs more. And a customer was going to get a payback in 6 months. Within the reason I'm here today, the reason the company's $4 billion is this moment. I went back and said, nobody needs, from my experience in finance, nobody needs a 6-month payback to justify a machine. We ended up raising the price to $110,000 from 55. Our demand went up from 30 machines a year to 100. Putting two $3.5 million companies together created a $35 million company with this growth. And it became the driving force of an IPO in London in 1988 that transformed us financially. So the 2 things I'd say to your audience to get out of that is cost should never be the reason that you price it. You should price to what the market will value. And that is a huge, I teach that all the time in MBA classes. Most people feel more comfortable finding out what your cost is and then kind of putting a margin on it and then asking the public to sell it. But that released in that the capacity to see it differently. And so that transformed our business, gave us the sizzle for a public offering and gave us a chance to start again. So that was the first acquisition, and we massively blew away our expectations.
Of course. Bob, and how did you pay for that company, given that you guys struggled financially at that time?
So the company we offered $1.8 million for company breaking even, and it had $1.2 million of cash on the balance sheet. So the net amount of cash was $600,000. So I had to fly to Chicago to this asset-based lender who I had very little, they just financed me, but I had no credibility. And I had to say, because we had to borrow money outside the deal. So we had to borrow money that we didn't have assets to cover. And the senior guy in Chicago said, you know what? I know the electronic industry. This sounds like a good deal. Now, you know you're going to go into an overfunding situation. You'll pay a premium for the cash that we used to pay, the $1.8 million. But if you get back into compliance, you'll get back into it still a high interest rate. So the asset-based lender, just because the senior guy had an experience in the electronics industry, he decided to support it. So we got funding from the asset-based lender, but we had to pay a premium in interest until we got kind of the cash, the debt back down into a comfort zone in terms of asset coverage. So anyway, we convinced the asset-based lender to finance it, and we blew it. We blew everything away. I mean, seriously, it's just phenomenally successful deal. But remember, I went into it with, if it failed, we were done. When I went to my board said, Bob, we're going to support you, but if it doesn't work, I'm sure it's all over. Not they were going to fire me, but because the company would be bankrupt. So it did just the opposite. It transformed the future of the company.
Such an incredible story. Did you have complete clarity that it will work at the time of going through with it, or did you have doubts?
Well, I'm going to go back and remind you, I'm an eternal optimist. So, and I had never done an acquisition, and I had no coaching or anything. The answer is, I was pretty convinced. Well, again, I took the traditional approach. We could reduce costs by consolidating the operations and putting them together. It was all justified based upon a reduction in costs, which is very traditional. To put two companies together, eliminate SG&A, other expenses. And so my initial approach. Now, the reason that we blew it away had nothing to do with reducing costs. It was capturing the value of the technology and bringing intensity into the company that was not there. Again, you go from 55,000 to 110,000, and you go from selling 30 machines a year to 100 machines. You can imagine the massive financial gain. So it was, again, and I had no coach. I told you my greatest gift is my common sense, okay, and creativity and positive attitude. So I honestly was not worried at all, because I felt in cost reduction I could make the numbers work, but we never pursued the cost. We never even looked at the cost reduction. We looked at the opportunity at the end of the day. And not many companies, but again, that was my first acquisition, and it transformed our future. I wouldn't advise any of your listeners that they're going to find many deals like I did. It was, massively transformative, because we brought this creativity, seeing the value, not driven by cost. So many people in our 150 acquisitions, adoptions, I have never seen anybody price their product based upon what it's worth, as opposed to a cost plus an industry normal margin. It's just, when I teach MBA students, I share that all the time. There's no relationship between cost and what something's worth. But we don't really know how to price things, because unless we say, well, in our industry, we make a 50% margin. So anyway, that was a big learning for me, but I had to learn it. It just came out of my creativity and my common sense.
And I think also your ability to build relationships with people along the way.
Yeah, so we were bidding for this company against a major glass company who wanted to buy it and own it. And the gentleman, Tony Alti, who lived in Denver, but was from South Africa, he represented the owners. At the end of the day, the initial bid we made was more of an earn-out deal, which would have been more comfortable for us. But this other glass company, was bidding for it. And the guy's name was Tony Alti. And Tony called me one day and said, Bob, I really like your earn-out deal, because there's more upside for us in the deal. But the owner in South Africa, he just wants out. And the other company offered just cash, you're out. So I went back to my team and I said, can we match this other offer? And we did some analysis and said, yeah, it looks like we can. So I went back to Tony and said, Tony, I can match that deal. He said, then Bob, you're going to get it. So, and why? The other company was a major public company with phenomenal financial resources. It was a very strategic acquisition for it. It was a glass company who had internalized this technology. But Tony liked me, okay? I would say to you, in our acquisitions, adoptions, 150 of them, when people like you, it affects how they behave. Okay. It's not just a cold, financial transaction. So believe it or not, I'm smart enough, I'm good enough, and people like me.
You definitely are. Do you remember how did you find that opportunity to begin with?
Yes. I had gone to a trade show in the packaging industry, and they happened to have had a booth, and I met them, and I heard that they were for sale. They were doing extremely well at the time, but were for sale. And at the time, I realized I couldn't pay what this fast-growing, very profitable company was. So the South African company ended up buying them, and it was a disaster for me. It actually went down, not up in revenue. They paid $8 million for the company. I ended up buying it for $1.8 million. And but it was at a trade show that I became aware of this company. It was fortuitous. I mean, when you're looking for opportunities, sometimes the best place to look is a trade show where everybody shows you their products and their people. So that's, again, I had an extremely strong board of directors, external board of directors, who stayed with me in these times, but they didn't really know how to guide me or coach me because we were experiencing some incredible challenges. They liked me and they stayed with me, but they couldn't really give me guidance. This had to come from me, my passion not to give up, my passion. But again, my wife and family would tell you that they never knew that we were under such pressure, okay? Because I just thought it was part of the job. I didn't come home and complain that we couldn't pay our bills and we were near bankruptcy because I thought it was just a challenge. So the way I dealt with challenges allowed me to learn from the challenges and overcome the challenges.
How did you select acquisition number 2?
Again, I still have no money. This acquisition is going along, and a major public company in England had a division that made packaging machinery that they wanted to divest. And the senior executive flew to America to offer us to buy this company that nobody wanted to buy. It made bottle washers for the milk industry. So if you return your milk bottle to the milkman, they made machines that washed the bottle and then would fill the bottle with milk. So anyway, a company called Dawson. This gentleman flew over from England and he said, Bob, we're aware of your company and we think you ought to look at buying this business. And we'll actually sell you the business and take stock in your company. And we'll help finance the restructuring you need to do. So here's a guy with no money. Even though INEX is starting to do well, I still have, limited finance. I'm barely any financial fees. So when a company offers you a $25 million business in England that is in technology that I understand, and they're willing to actually take stock in a privately held company as consideration and lend you £500,000 for transition costs. And again, I knew how I could make that company better from my experience. So we did it. And so the second one was with, again, the seller financed it in effect. I didn't use that. Again, I'm still financially very fragile. Even though INEX is starting to do well, our historic business was still bleeding cash because of the dynamics of the market. So that was the second one, the Dawson acquisition in England from a company called Vickers.
And again, it happened because of how you build relationships, that they wanted to sell to you. They trusted you.
Yeah, I would say to everybody that it's not just numbers, because I had no money. People like me. I handle people with respect and dignity. And when people like you, they want to work with you. And I think as I look back, in most of the opportunities, that has been a material factor. Okay. And I don't know how I can't tell your listeners, other than it's just, I was blessed with this combination of common sense and positivity and creativity. And it blended together. People want to do business with you. And so, and again, the public company in England ended up eventually selling their stock back to us, and which was fabulous. They did well. We did phenomenally well with the acquisition. And it became another key piece. So it was in 84, I told you we did that first acquisition. And by May of 87, we went public in London with this blend of $35 million business. So again, it was a $50 million business in 87. 20 million was our historic business, and 35 million were these acquisitions. And so we had a chance to sell off the acquisitions on the London Stock Exchange. Looked like $1 million to one, because what did I buy? A bunch of broken businesses nobody wanted. And I put them together. But when you put them together, they were described as sunrise and sunset business. Sunrise business with electronics, sunset business was the returnable milk bottle business. So it created, and this, we were only looking for we were looking for $28 million in investment in this company that would become public, and we retained 30%. People sent in $1.1 billion in cash trying to buy our $28 million stock. We made more interest income on that money that we held until it was sent back to the buyers than the IPO cost us. And Harvard wrote a case study because people were astounded that I bought these struggling companies starting in 84, put them together, and ended up with this phenomenally successful IPO on the London Stock Exchange. So that was a transformative event because we could pay off all of our debt. Now we had the $20 million historic business that was still sick, and we had 30% ownership in this $35 million business that was public in London.
Such an incredible story. How did that organization in London that cleaned milk bottles found out about you? How did you meet them and build relationship with them to the point that they reached out to you with that offer?
After my dad died in 75, this gentleman, Mike Windsor, flew over from the British company because there was litigation on a patent between their bottling business and ours. So we made bottle washers for the brewing industry and soft drink industry. They made bottle washers for basically the milk industry. And we had a patent infringement, and he flew over to try and resolve it. So that's when I met Mike. And the way we handle each other in this conflict was out of respect. And the way we handled resolving that technology conflict built a relationship, a positive relationship. And so when they had tried to sell the business and couldn't sell it, Mike thought about us because of his memories of meeting me. So the foundation was set, several years before in a litigation, which normally isn't positive, but the way we handled it was positive, and that is how they were aware of us.
Such an incredible story. So what happens next? How do you go from 2 acquisitions to more than 150? That is a lot for one person to manage.
Good question. So another key point for your listeners. So we have the London IPO, which blew my board was astounded that we bought these broken companies, put them together with the electronics company. So, and that we went from, do you think we could really go public? Originally, I thought it was going to be over the counter, kind of a secondary market in London. And then we kept getting through barriers, and all of a sudden we're going to have a full listing. And then people said 1.1 billion. People were astounded. And so we went from, and right before May of 87, when we went public, I couldn't borrow $5 million to pay off. My banks wanted out. So I had exhausted the asset-based lenders, and they were saying, we really would like to get out of this. And I tried to go to a bank to pay off the asset. Nobody wanted to lend me any money still. So we have the public offering, pay off all of our debt. We've got $28 million in the bank and a sick $20 million business, which is the historic business. this is another point I think is of value to your listeners. I sat down for 9 months and thought about the first 20 years of my career and what I had learned. I had people approaching me now because I had cash. Well, you got to invest in this. You got to invest in, I had all kinds of people. I said, nope, I'm just going to think. I spent 9 months just thinking, what did I learn? And from what do I learn? How could I create a better future? And I created what I called the strategy for growth, value, and liquidity. All the challenges that I experienced, I now had a chance to start again, still with a broken $20 million business, but to build something. And I said, I'm going to create a balanced business with as much recurring revenue as I can. And recurring revenue is spare parts. In our business, selling spare parts is a significant contributor to our financial stability. And so I said, I'm going to look for companies that have a big installed base, good aftermarket business, because it gives us that recurring revenue that happens every day, reduces the swings of capital spending. So anyway, I sat back for 9 months, looked around our industry. There were a lot of struggling companies that had a lot of installed base, so it was a pretty fertile field to look. And so I identified probably 6 companies that I thought maybe we could go after, and it would take us from 20 million to 100 million with diversity. I would get into filling and case packing, again, balance, and different customers in different industries. And then we went to execute that strategy. That strategy in hindsight, that business model in hindsight was so powerful that it took us to 4 billion, not 100 million, 4 billion. And so I'd say to everybody, it's not just about your profit, your EBITDA, it is, do you know where you're going with your business? Do you know why you want to go there? And then do you know when you get there, will you have taken your stakeholders to a better place? So having a vision of a business model, okay, which is, I hear very few people talking about business model. They talk about the industry they're in or the products they got. We talk a lot about the business model. And our culture then of caring for our 12,000 team members is the premium fuel that activates the business model. Okay? If you are a nice guy running a company and your market drops by 50%, you got to let 50% of your people go. You say, not my fault, the market changed. Well, why didn't you see this? Why weren't you designing your company to be aware of that? You just hurt 50% of your people because your business model failed. And some people say it's about getting the right people on the bus. I say it's about building a safe bus. And the bus is your business model. And then you need drivers who are your leaders who know where they're going and how to drive that bus safely. And then anybody you invite on that bus is going to be fine because you got a safe bus with drivers who know how to drive it safely. That is what we do. Our focus is making sure we have a place where people, when they join us, they have a responsible opportunity to stay with our company and live life fully. We believe a grounded sense of hope for the future. Now, I'm going to get laid off because orders went down, and we live in a society where layoffs are happening every day, everywhere, which is very destructive to human mental health and family health. It's demoralizing. It's one of the lowest points in your life to be told, sorry, we don't need you anymore. I'm sure you'll work things out. So the business, I can't emphasize enough, you've got to have a business model, okay, that gives your stakeholders a future. Not just that creates human and economic value. We call it people, purpose, and performance. And the first word is people. We owe it to our people to have a business model that they can decide to get married, raise a family, buy a home, educate their family, because they can count on a career with us. Not going to be walked in one day and said, sorry, it's all over. Around a purpose that inspires them, not manages them, not gives them a job, but inspires them to bring their gifts to not only progress their career, but help those people they work with because they do their job well. And then you got to create value. If you're not creating value, you're going to hurt your people. If you don't create value in alignment with what your investors believe is a fair return, you're going to be forced to take actions that you don't want to do. So when you see people laying off people, that's a failure of a business model. Okay. It's a failure of leadership. We tend to, the market changed and this changed. Hey, guys, with your greatest gift is to design a business model where your people are safe in your care and have a future. And we could heal so much of the brokenness we're seeing where we use layoffs to make numbers work.
I agree. And everyone within the organization is so lucky to be part of it. And I think that is especially such a blessing for somebody who doesn't have a lot of support at home, because the organization in a way is like a family where you're not replaceable.
Yeah, it's interesting. When we started 20 years ago, our own university to teach leadership instead of management, and we taught human skills of empathetic listening, how to recognize and celebrate others, and how to serve others, those 3 classes. 95% of the feedback we got from our team members was how it affected their marriage and their relationship with their kids. It never occurred to me from my education, my experience in the world, that the way I would run Barry-Wehmiller would affect people's marriage and their relationship with their children and their health. What we have learned is that leadership has a profound impact on the way the people in your care live. Okay? And that's a revelation, because I thought you give me your talents, I'll give you a fair salary. And when I don't need you anymore, I'll just lay you off. But that's kind of what I was taught. It's about pay and benefits. What we've learned, it's really about caring, genuinely caring for the people that you have the privilege of leading. Because as you said, we have people for 40 hours a week in our care. Okay? 40 hours a week. The way we treat them will profoundly affect their health and the way they go home and treat their kids and their families and behave in our country. And what Tom Friedman said recently, the New York Times writer, is that we don't have a poverty of money in this country. We have a poverty of dignity. And when people are used and not cared for, they feel a sense of humiliation. And when they feel humiliated, you'll see anger and unrest like you've never seen before. What are we seeing in this country today? Anger and unrest. We don't understand it. Is it the cell phone? Is it drugs? Is it government? We have a society where we use people to achieve goals and discard them when we don't need them anymore, because we have a society based upon success is money, power, and position. It doesn't matter how you get those, as long as it's legal, because then you can write the checks to charity and people will say you're a wonderful person. Okay? The greatest act of charity is not the checks you write. The greatest act of charity is how you treat the people you have the privilege of leading.
How did you approach getting customers, keeping customers happy, that side of the business? So, for example, with your first acquisition, the number of units bought in a year increased dramatically. And I'm sure similar situation was with many other acquisitions. How do you view that part of the business? Many people struggling with that.
One of the things that I've learned working in the commercial area and running all these businesses, and I never really heard it talked about before, is when you earn people's trust, good things happen. A lot of people think it's about price and delivery and competitive technology. But I think people do business with people they trust. Okay? At the end of the day, that is a key. And you can't teach trust. Okay? You earn trust. And some people have the ability to do that, and some people it's just not a natural skill. So from a customer standpoint, one of the things that's fascinating is as we've embraced these, given our team members these human skills, and they feel cared for within our company and that they have a safe future, guess what they do? They treat our customers better, okay? The the bad news about COVID, it was highly contagious. The good news about caring, it's even more contagious than COVID. When people feel cared for, it releases in them the capacity to care for others. So these human skills we teach and practice internally impact. I mean, I'll give you an example. I gave a keynote speech in one of the industries we're in to a big convention. And then one of our largest customers wanted to have a private luncheon with me after my speech. They didn't say why, they just, a major customer. So I went with the president of our division and I was walking around. I said, do you know what they want to talk about? He said, not really. So we sit in a table with about 6 of their team members. And they said, Mr. Chapman, we've been waiting to meet you for years. We've probably given out 1,000 of your books in our company. It's made a profound impact on our culture. They never talked about our machinery, the technology, the price, the issues we have. They talked about how much our culture has impacted them. Okay? Our team had no idea because we think it's about price and delivery and competitiveness. And when you treat your team members with care and they go out into the world and our customers see the way our people feel, I don't even know how to put a value on it. So we don't do it. We don't do this to enhance our relationship with our customers. We do this because all 12,000 of our team members around the world are somebody's precious child who simply wants to know that who they are and what they do matters. And it turns out that these humanistic skills we teach gives us the skills to let people know they matter. And when they feel they matter, they feel they're cared for. And when they feel cared for, it impacts their personal life, their professional life, and their health.
100% agree. And what happened with the struggling initial business?
The INEX company became part of our public offering, which was called Barry-Wehmiller International in London. And it grew from the 35 million when it went public to about a $250 million public company in England. And after probably 10 years of being involved on the board, I made a decision that having our money in a public company in England, really, we could better deploy that money in our company to adopt other companies. So it was a better use. So we took our liquidity, sold our 30% and redeployed it to our own company. And the public company ended up being bought out by a German private equity firm. And it's initially bought out by a German equipment company. And that division ended up getting sold back to, that electronics division ended up being sold back to the original company that I won against in 1987. So they eventually got it, but it was about 20 years later. So it was sold to a glass company. That division was sold to a glass company. And again, that whole experience was before our transformation from management to leadership. Okay, it was all about numbers in those days, that we're now talking about. This truly human leadership, caring for the people we have the privilege of leading, wasn't born until around 2000, okay, where we had already divested the English company. So I would say to you that we were doing well, we were doing fine prior to this revelation that we could care for people and create human and economic value and harmony. We were doing well. But when we had these revelations that changed the way we saw our responsibility to our 12,000 team members, it's accelerated good to better because we put a higher premium culture in that business model than the traditional using people to achieve goals instead of caring for people to achieve human and economic goals in harmony. So I would say to you, some people say to me, how do you justify the cost of these initiatives, your university, these caring? I said, I don't need to justify caring for people. How do you justify not caring for people? And they have no answer. You don't have to justify safety, right? Nobody has to go to their board and say, look, we want people to wear hard hats. We want people to wear safety glasses. We want hard shoes. And it's going to cost us $1 million. You don't have to justify safety. Why do you have to justify caring? Safety is physical. Caring is your soul. We need both. You could not have an eye injury, a finger injury, a toe injury, which is great. But you go home not feeling valued. And the stress of that ends up, remember, when I talk to CEOs of companies, I say, you're all worried about the cost of healthcare? You are the problem. 74% of all illnesses are chronic. The biggest cause of chronic illness is stress, and the biggest cause of stress is work. And Jeffrey Pfeiffer at Stanford wrote a book, Dying for a Paycheck, and he talks about this in his book. He doesn't mean anxious to get it. He estimates we are killing in America 120,000 people a year of work-related stress. Okay? Does anybody care? We're so chase numbers that people don't know how to care. It's not that they're bad people. They weren't taught to care. They were taught and promoted to achieve results. So we are kind of self-destructing as a civilization for economic gain. We thought money would create happiness, but it doesn't. Caring creates happiness.
100%. And I really hope that as many people as possible will hear you speak, read your book. So let's talk about your book. What do you want to say, building on everything we spoke about today? Let's say if someone reads your book, what are the key things you want them to take away?
The goal of writing the book was to touch people's hearts, to awaken them to a different way of leading in the world. That's the goal. And when we wrote the first edition 10 years ago, we had no idea how it would be received in the market. And we were told by our publisher, Penguin, one of the top business book publishers, that a good business book sells 10, maybe 15,000 copies. We just topped 110,000 copies in 7 languages around the world because the message is so healing, so inspiring to people. And I've heard thousands, the reaction to our message around the world. So the book, as it was written 10 years ago, I was told by Raj Suzodi, my co-author, the first third it's called the hero's journey. How did you go from management to leadership? Take me on that journey so I can understand. So the first third is my journey. And the second 2/3 of the book is, how do you do it now? Okay, I understand how you got there. How do you bring this to your company? So it was really a how-to, my journey, and then a how-to. And 10 years later, seeing how our message is spread around the world. And also, I think I mentioned that Harvard wrote a case study, not about a public offering, but about our culture about 8 or 9 years ago. And it's become one of their better selling cases with 70 universities in the world using it to teach leaders how to care. And so we've had this 10 years of hundreds of speeches I've given all over the world, to the United Nations, to Congress, military. I mean, I've spoken to every part of society. I've seen the brokenness, but we've learned so much about the impact of our message that we wanted to capture that. So the 5 additional chapters, we spent a year reflecting on what have we learned from when we wrote the first book that will kind of be the last piece of this equation. The impact of doing this is, and we've seen it. And so the new book, Everybody Matters Still, the 10th year anniversary edition that comes out in 2 weeks from now, I believe it is going to become a foundational textbook for business schools and other parts of our society, like education and healthcare, where that people go through the transition from using people to achieve goals to caring for people to achieve results, to begin to heal this poverty of dignity. That is our hope for the book. And we've had massive interest in this message in the last 10 years, from the Harvard case study, the TED Talk. Simon Sinek talks about us all over the world. I would say to your audience, in the hundreds of speeches I've given all over the world, nobody at McKinsey level, Harvard level, stand for it. Nobody debates what I just said to you. Nobody. It's just so far from what we're taught and what we see in the world that we don't know how to go to this better place. And so our goal in the book, our goal A is to continue to live it so people can see it's not an academic theory of the way the world should be. All we're sharing is what we have experienced through these series of revelations I had that took us from management to leadership to the theme of the new book is the way we lead impacts the way people live, which I was never told. I think this will become a foundational book used in education to bring people from the journey of where we are to where we need to be, of caring for the people we have the privilege of leading.
I will wrap up with one or two questions I love to ask when there's a few minutes left. Over your entire life so far, what were 2-3 aha moments, realizations that you feel comfortable sharing that really changed the way you look at life or the way you look at business?
Well, relative to the audience that you're talking to, I would say to you that from a business standpoint, the revelation was going from seeing people as a function for my success to seeing the people in my span of care as somebody's precious child, knowing the profound impact I could make on their life. So from a business standpoint, that profound change, way of seeing the responsibility of leadership, the privilege of leadership was a profound change. And as you know, it happened at a wedding. When I was watching a young man and a young lady being married around 2000, and I saw how everybody thought they were so precious. And I had this revelation during the ceremony. Oh my God, all 12,000 of our team members in the world are just as precious as that young man and young lady. And they simply want to know they matter. And I have the opportunity to profoundly impact people's lives. That was, from a business standpoint, the major revelation. From a personal standpoint, we live in a world where our education system teaches us to speak, how to articulate your thoughts, and to debate. Critical thinking, and we have debating contests to win debates. And what we've learned in our university when we teach empathetic listening, not listening to judge, not listening to debate, but listening to understand and validate, that we do a DISC profile test to begin this class, which is a test for your personality. There's like 4 basic D, I, S, and C. It stands for dominant and so forth. And so we start the class by you taking the class, or this test. And so we give the results to everybody as we start. And they say, is this me? We say, well, go ask your spouse at home. And they come back and say, well, I guess that's me. So it's an x-ray of your personality. Again, I thought before that, I know we're born with different physical characteristics, athletic capabilities, mental capabilities. I understand, but it never occurred to me that we're born with different personalities, okay? And this is an accountant's view of a psychological, but it's simple. That personality type, D, I, S, or C, whichever you have, creates a lens through which you experience the world, okay? You didn't pick the color of your hair, the color of your eyes. You didn't pick your personality. You were born with it. And it shapes the way you see the world. But what we learned is that you need to understand that 2 people can look at the same facts and see them entirely differently. But what we teach you to is to debate the way I saw it is right, and I won the debate. Instead of listening to how the other person saw it, who has a different lens than you. So it opens your compassion and understanding. I thought the way I saw the issue on abortion or taxes and all these issues, but it makes me much more open to realize I only know the way I saw it. And the way I saw it doesn't mean that I'm right, okay? It just means the lens through which I was blessed, the personality type, shaped the way I saw it. So it makes me much more understanding and compassionate to people seeing things differently. And when we do that, we don't spend all of our time trying to convince everybody that the way we see it is right and the way they see it is wrong. So from a human side, that was a major revelation, and allows me to deal with people who have dramatically different views than I have with compassion and understanding, because I learn from the way they see it, because it expands the lens through which I can see things when I begin to try and understand things through their lens. So believe it or not, we all walk around with a lens on that is our personality that shapes the way we see things. And the way you see it and the way somebody next to you see it could be entirely different of the same situation. So that allows us a dramatic change in our ability to deal with the beauty of diversity, not the conflict of diversity.
Definitely. And often even our spouse will see things very differently, and that kind of understanding is very handy. Bob, thank you so much. Such an incredible conversation. I really appreciate you being here. Where can our listeners learn more about you, buy your book, anything you want to share?
Our book comes out the third week in October. It's going to be on Amazon. It's the 10-year anniversary. There is my TED Talk that is on TEDx Talk that's been animated. So the 20-minute TED Talk is animated to a 9-minute version. There must be 50 videos of my talks on the internet that are available. And I would say to anybody in the audience, the joy that you feel when you go from managing people to leading people with empathy and care is the greatest joy in the world. I would only hope that some of the people in your audience have the chance to experience the joy of caring and being cared for. And I think if you can embrace the message of teaching people human skills, teaching people to listen without judgment, teaching people to find the goodness in others, and teaching people to actually seize the opportunities of others, we could have the world the way it was meant to be, where people genuinely care for each other. That was my wish for all your listeners.
And my wish as well. Bob, thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here.
It's my joy. Thank you for sharing our message. Take care.
Our guest today again was Bob Chapman, CEO of a $3.6 billion capital equipment firm and co-author of Everybody Matters. You can find a distilled set of insights and action steps from this discussion at firmsconsulting.com/action. And this episode is sponsored by strategytraining.com. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'm looking forward to connect with you all next time.